The Arem language, also known as Khmer, is a language spoken by the Arem people, native to the mountains along the border of central Vietnam and eastern Laos. Today, there are less than 20 speakers remaining in the world, possibly less than 10, thereby making Arem a severely endangered language, which is unfortunately likely to disappear very soon. So, there really isn't much information on this topic, like it's very surface level, barely any information has been published about it online, and most importantly, I could not find a recording of what this language actually sounds like. As such, I decided to travel there and find out personally. What better place to get answers than at the source itself?
Well, here we are in Dong Hoi, about to embark on a journey deep into the Vietnamese jungle on the border with Laos. Yeah, interesting how it's gonna go.
This turned out to be one of the coolest and most incredible adventures I have ever gone on. A 2-hour drive on scooters through the middle of the jungle into the unknown. I had zero idea of what we would encounter and how people would receive us, but in the end I am so glad I went. More on that in a little bit, but first, some background. Who are these people and where do they come from? As mentioned, the Arem people are native to the border region of Vietnam and Laos, more specifically the Bo Trac district of the Quang Binh province in Vietnam and the eastern part of the Cam Muan province of Laos. This entire area is very rural and rather difficult to get to, on account of the thick jungle-covered Annamite mountain range. Very little is known of the Arem people prior to the 1950s. In fact, they were only known to other local groups living in the area until the Vietnamese military accidentally bumped into them during the Vietnam War. According to the Cultural Heritage Association of Vietnam, at the end of 1959, the Ca Sheng border guards, stationed in Tuong Hoa, Minh Hoa district, Quang Binh province, central Vietnam, during one of their patrols, saw a group of forest people, very timid and naked, who climbed cliffs and trees with the agility of wild animals. Until then, they were purely nomadic hunter-gatherers who lived in the forest, and especially in caves. Side note, this area is home to some of the largest cave systems in the entire world. There's so many of them all over the place. The Arem were one of the last peoples of this part of the world to start living in sedentary houses as late as the 1960s. Even to this day, especially during the harvest season, some families choose to go back to their ancestral caves to stay there for a few months, preferring their traditional lifestyle to staying in the village. They also have this tradition of collecting honey from bees who build their hives on top of really tall trees. The whole process is very fascinating and has been passed down for who knows how many countless generations. No, it's not the same as the hallucinogenic honey from Nepal, but that would be really cool. When preparing to go to visit the Arem people, I had one main goal in mind. Find a speaker and record them speaking the Arem language because I couldn't find any examples of it online. However, I also had one little side quest. Try the honey. When arriving at the village, my friend and I, there were 2 of us in total, were just coasting through the village, when this random woman signaled us to come over to her. Turns out she was the store owner of the one store in the village. So, we sat down to have a drink and ask her some questions. Communication was pretty difficult, honestly. My friend and I, neither of us speaks any Vietnamese, and none of the villagers speak any English, so everything was done through Google Translate pretty much. Reception wasn't the best, and my dumbass didn't think of pre-downloading the offline Vietnamese version somehow. So, yeah. Another frustrating thing is that the store owner, who was an elderly woman, I'm not sure she fully understood how an iPhone works. I don't blame her at all, but this meant that I could only ask her yes or no questions without any elaboration. I tried to explain to her for like 10 minutes that she could just speak into the mic or type something in Vietnamese, but she was just not getting it. And I really didn't want to be pushy and annoying, so I just kind of left it at that. I asked her if she spoke the Arem language or knew of anyone in the village who spoke the Arem language, and she just kept going like this. So that was a dead end, unfortunately. But then I asked her if she knew where to get some honey. And she just walks back into her house and comes back with this plastic bottle completely filled to the brim with honey. And you could even see some dead bees kind of like floating at the bottom of the bottle. So you knew it was authentic. And she pours us each a little cup. And it was incredible.
Wow. Some of the best honey I've ever had, genuinely.
With the side quest successfully completed, it was time to move on to the main objective: find a speaker. But first, some quick statistics. Now, population-wise, numbers are all over the place. They counted about 100 Arem people in 1960, 53 in 1963, 102 in the year 2000. At the same time, according to a 2021 study, there are another 250-ish Arem in Lao. But the Wikipedia article somehow has the figure of 500 to 800 Arem people, the only source of which is the Joshua Project, which mentions 900 people, 800 of which are in Laos, and 100 of which are in Vietnam. So I have no idea what's going on. Also, if you don't know, the Joshua Project is an American evangelical Christian organization of missionaries whose main purpose is to convert indigenous peoples all over the world. I have nothing against Christianity, and Lord knows that historically speaking, missionaries were the OG linguists who, over the last 1,000+ years, have extensively documented a crazy amount of languages all over the world, but it's specifically the Joshua Project that gives me a bit of a creepy vibe, and I'm not sure I trust them that much. The Arem are underexposed to the gospel in both Laos and Vietnam. Instead of relying on the power and love of the Lord, they look to the spirit world to provide them with their daily needs. Pray the Arem would soon have access to the gospel and would be open to knowing Jesus Christ. Joshua, dude, just leave them alone. Just let them be. Anyway, the situation with the number of speakers is even worse. There are a few research trips to the Arem community between 1991 and 1996 which reported that a little more than 20 people, or a quarter of the population, regularly used Arem. Then there's another two sources from 2015 and 2018 respectively that say about 20 people. And finally, the most recent study I found from 2023 says that there were two field trips in 2019 and 2021 respectively where they counted only 7 people who could still speak the language. So the situation is pretty bad, but this just made it that much more exciting of a challenge to actually find one of these speakers and hear live what this mysterious language sounds like. After sampling the delicious honey, we went back to cruising around the village. Most people were just kind of staring at us, probably not understanding what the hell we're doing there. And truth be told, I felt really uncomfortable going up to random people's houses and start questioning them. I really didn't want to be that guy. Eventually, we circled around to the entrance of the village, and we spotted a man in what looked like a police uniform, just kind of chilling on a chair, smoking a cigarette. So I stopped by him and popped the question: "Do you know anyone in the village who speaks the Arem language?" He said that he himself wasn't sure, but he called over a buddy of his in the house nearby who also didn't know. That buddy called another guy, and then another guy, and eventually there were like 4 or 5 people huddled around me, all arguing in Vietnamese, and I'm just standing there, not understanding a single word. All of a sudden, there were these 2 guys passing by on a scooter, and the policeman flags them down, tells them to come over. They talk for a minute, and then they tell me to follow them on my scooter, and they will introduce me to a woman who allegedly speaks the Arem language. I get on my scooter, we drive back into the village to a road that I didn't even notice the first time when we went in there, and then we roll up to one of these wooden stilt houses, and the guys tell me to follow them up the ladder and into the house. And that's when I got introduced to this old woman who actually spoke the Arem language. Mission success. The way that this worked is that I wrote out a sentence in Google Translate, passed the phone to the guides who read it in Vietnamese, and then translated it into their local dialect in order to explain to the woman what I came all this way for. All I asked for is if she could just please say a couple of phrases or just tell a short story or something like that in the Arem language, and for permission to film her just for a few minutes. She agreed, and I started filming. Keep in mind that unfortunately I couldn't get a translation, so I actually have no idea what she's saying. But either way, please enjoy a clip of what the endangered Arem language actually sounds like.
Nun pia do to coop. Ayam roy. Mua cứ mang hay trên chấm rau mua yo cất. Nun pia pe lỡ nun pia pe chết bra rồi. Ong mua pe. Nun pia ra chết rồi ong mua chết rồi với cái đừng. Cứ trâu chặt vắt vai vắt hay mưa. thì chấm rau tươi mà chấm rau bằng hay dầm rồi chào bằng hay em mưa.
After she finished, I asked her how many people still speak the language, and according to my guides, she said probably less than 10. So at least I was glad that I was able to confirm the online sources that I mentioned earlier. Once this was done, I thanked the woman kindly, I thanked my guides, I gave them all a little bit of money for their troubles, which they seemed very happy with, and then my friend and I went on our merry way back into the jungle. This was one of the most surreal, amazing, and exciting experiences I have ever had. I have a few final thoughts that I want to share with you in the conclusion, but first, very briefly, classification and phonology. When it comes to classification, things get a bit more complicated. There exists the Austroasiatic language family, one of the largest language families in Southeast Asia. Within it, the largest branch is the Vietic branch, and the largest Vietic language is Vietnamese. The Vietic languages are further subdivided into a few subgroups. In 1973, the Vietnamese government decided to lump a few distinct groups together into one ethnicity called the Chut people, which are included in the Vietnamese government's list of the officially recognized 54 ethnic groups of Vietnam. At the state level, the Chut people comprise of the Arem, Malieng, Mai, Ruk, and Sak peoples. The word Chut is basically an umbrella term of convenience for these groups, as they do have similar cultures and they live similar lifestyles. Although there are some differences between them, especially when it comes to languages, and especially the Arem language. Now, it should, keyword should, make sense that all Chut peoples speak Chut languages, right? Well, not exactly. The Mai, Ruk, and Sak do in fact speak the Chut language, each having their own distinct dialects which are all relatively closely related to each other. The Malieng speak the Malieng language, which is sometimes also considered to be a dialect of Chut, but other times it's considered to be its own language because it itself has like 50 sub-dialects and sub-varieties and whatever else. Don't worry about it. However, the Arem language is definitely its own distinct language and shouldn't be lumped together with the Chut dialects. So, to briefly summarize this classification conundrum, Chut is still one of the officially recognized 54 ethnic groups of Vietnam, although, from a linguistic point of view, the Chut group comprised of speakers of 3 different Vietic languages: Chut, including Ruk, Mai, and Sak dialects, Malieng, and Arem. So what makes Arem so special? What makes it different from the rest? Arem doesn't really have any wild, crazy, and unique features that make it stand out from the world's languages. However, it does have a fun thing that make it stand out from other Vietic languages. If you've ever heard Vietnamese spoken or seen it written down, you might know that many words are monosyllabic, meaning they're made up of one syllable. Contrary to popular belief, Vietnamese isn't entirely monosyllabic. I can already hear people correcting me. There are still many words that are made up of 2 or 3 syllables, or a single word can be made up of smaller words that together form a new meaning. Still, Vietnamese is rather strict with its syllable system. Furthermore, Vietnamese doesn't really like consonant clusters, that is, a few consonants strung together without a vowel in between them, especially in comparison to a language like English. In Vietnamese, a typical syllable follows this scheme: consonant, vowel, sometimes another consonant, plus tone. Oftentimes with glides in between, but that's not really relevant here. In English, we have words like strengths, which is consonant, 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 vowel, consonant, 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 consonant. Both of these are technically single syllables, but, obviously, what the hell, very different things. Now, most Vietic languages follow the same scheme as Vietnamese, with most syllables being relatively simple and without consonant clusters. The Arem language stands out because it has by far the most sesqui syllables and consonant clusters, more so than any other Vietic language. The syllable scheme for these sesqui syllables looks more like this: consonant dash consonant vowel plus sometimes another consonant, with the first consonant sort of acting like a vessel for a pre-syllable, which is short, unstressed, and without a distinctive vowel. For example, as mentioned in the beginning, their endonym, as in the word that the Arem people used to call themselves in their own language, is Khumrao. And this is what it looks like written down in the IPA. As you can see, there is a little schwa vowel inserted between the first consonant k and the second consonant m. So instead of it being a purely clustered kumrao, it's pronounced kumrao, where the schwa acts as the core of the unstressed pre-syllable. Now, this is a very, very basic explanation. Syllables are an incredibly complex topic in linguistics, and there's just so much that goes into it, and I'm really not an expert in this at all. But the point here is that when comparing how often this occurs amongst all Vietic languages, such as Vietnamese, Muong, Tho, Tuom Liha, Chut, and all others, for the most part, most of them follow this monosyllabic scheme. When looking at the sesqui syllables, we have a language such as Pong that is 10% sesquisyllabic, Tavong, Malieng, and the Chut languages stand at around 35 to 40% sesquisyllabic, and Arem stands at 55 to 60%, more than any other Vietic language. So when looking at what makes Arem stand out amongst all other Vietic languages, this is the answer. If you'd like to read more on this, I highly recommend you check out the studies I will link in the video description. They go into great detail on this, and they explain it better than I ever could. In any case, now we transition to the conclusion for a few final thoughts. One day I was just kind of going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole like I sometimes do, and I ended up on Arem. I thought it's very sad that there's barely any speakers, there's barely any information, and it's about to disappear. With so much mystery behind it, I wanted to try and shine a light on it a little bit. I was traveling across Vietnam anyway, and I thought, why not go on a little side quest and put my money where my mouth is and actually do some amateur field research. I feel incredibly lucky, privileged, and humbled that I got to personally visit their beautiful village, interact with the locals, and learn a bit about their way of life. But there's definitely a few things that I regret about the whole thing. Like, the more time that passed since we left the village, the more I began thinking about all the things that I could have done differently and all the additional things that I could have done. Like, this was my first time ever doing anything like this. I had never had any formal training in field research, and I was incredibly self-conscious and worried about interacting with the Arem people. I had no idea how they would receive us. I was also kind of borderline worried that maybe we weren't even supposed to legally be in that area, but in the end everything was fine. Everybody was happy to see us. Nobody had any problems with us being there. My number one biggest regret is definitely not finding a person who speaks fluent Vietnamese and English to come with us and be our guide, because the language barrier and the difficulty in communication definitely impacted the amount of information that I could learn, and also how comfortable I felt with the work I was doing, and even more importantly, how the Arem people felt with a random foreigner just showing up on their doorstep asking random questions who doesn't even speak any Vietnamese. Secondly, there are just so many other questions I could have asked about their culture, their traditions, their way of life, their ancestral caves, so many more things. If I had properly prepared for this expedition, maybe I could have even been taken to visit one of these ancestral caves, or witnessed the honey collection process, or maybe met another Arem speaker or two apart from the old woman. Who knows what else? By the time we finished chatting to the old woman, it was already getting quite late, and we had to hurry and get back on the road. The jungle road was sketchy enough as it is during daylight, and we definitely didn't want to risk it in pitch blackness. Basically, yeah, there are so many things that I could have done differently, and I really wish I did. But at the same time, when reflecting on this whole adventure, I'm really glad that this was my first introduction to endangered language fieldwork because of how accommodating, easygoing, and patient everyone I interacted with was. This was truly a magnificent experience for me. I now know what to do differently and how to proceed. Hopefully, this is the first of many, many, many more similar adventures. I have so many more ideas that I can't wait to bring into reality and to share them all with you. In conclusion, to all of the Arem people out there, I wish you only the absolute best. May your culture and language survive and thrive for many generations to come. I don't care how unrealistic that seems. They're a lovely bunch of people, and I just wish them well. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the sources in the video description. I hope you have a lovely day and a wonderful night. Peace out.